Hi, in this video we want to talk about the attachments that we can add to the trunk. For this I'm going to use a pine tree object, which is a typical tree that has protrusions coming out of the trunk. So this is created with the pine preset that you have in the pine tree entry under tree library. To make things run fast, I'm gonna uncheck the branch generation over here and just focus on the trunk. Now I need to create the protrusions before I can actually add them to my trunk, because if I go to attachments and protrusions on, I need to provide the protrusion objects that I want to add. Actually, this is very easy. All I have to do is copy this, and I'll call it, before I give it a name, I'm gonna just use the default. That's why I didn't name it, because it's gonna be renamed anyway. And I'm gonna name it now to protrusion 1. And I'm gonna uncheck the generate branches, and I need to add caps to the trunk, so trunk parameters and generate caps, and I can just add a cap material if I want, or I can just delete all these and just add the material that goes like this. I'm not going to be using any flares, so I'm going to go down and reduce the root flares strength like so. Also, the height of that trunk should not be so large, so I'm going to reduce it. This is what I have so far. Now if I want to have a different appearance, I can just change the randomization. So this is one that is good for my taste. I'm going to make 2 more. The first thing I'll do is change the seed for them. The second thing is change the radius and the height. So I'm gonna reduce the height, say to 150, and the radius, say to 15. And for this one, I'll put it in between, so 185 and 20, just 20, and reduce the turbulence. So now we have 3 protrusions that we can use over for this tree. Okay, so I'm gonna replace the materials here. Whenever you are changing the tree, if you have changed materials on, it will actually change the materials. Alright, but if you uncheck it, it will not change materials. So this is how you can change the tree without changing the default materials that it might have attached. So let's go back to the pine tree like so. I think I'm gonna leave the branches on, making sure that the viewport levels are kept to a small value. Alright, so I'm gonna select this and go to my attachments, and here I need to take the protrusions and drag them down over here, and I'm gonna check protrusions on, and right away I'm gonna see that these protrusions are distributed over the height of the trunk. So the first thing I can do is reduce their size. So now we have a smaller size. It's too small, but before I increase the size back, they are too dense, so I set the density to 0.05, which will give me a smaller number. It's still too high, but I'm gonna increase the size for now. And okay, let's set this to 0.03. So the first thing I can do here is change the randomness of that distribution without changing the randomness of the tree. Because if I go over here, I would change the randomness of the whole tree, which I don't want to do. So this will actually give you control over the randomness of the placement of these protrusions. Okay, so the second thing I want to change is their orientation. So if I increase the X value for the orientation, they're gonna point downwards, and if I decrease it or give it a negative value, they're gonna point upwards. You can randomize this by changing the randomization in the X, which will give some of them a downward orientation and the others an upward orientation, especially if you set this value to 0. So now they are really random, and this randomness is also affected by the random seed over here. Now if I zoom in, I see that since I rotated them and they are initially taking the radius of the trunk for their position, I see that some of them are sticking out. And to fix that problem, I change the offset value. So if I decrease the offset, they go inside the tree. If I increase it, they go outside. Okay, and another thing I can do is have them scale according to the profile. So if I go down and choose scale to profile, they're gonna get smaller while they go up the height of the trunk, depending on the profile curve that we have over here. So if I decrease it, they're gonna get much smaller. If I increase it, they're gonna get bigger. So let's fix back their the offset to make sure that they don't go outside the trunk. Now you can play with the size as you have seen before, and you can play with the growth. So if you decrease the growth value, they're gonna be growing one by one, and they're not just popping out, but they are scaling. So you see that they are scaling over the trunk height. Now they're starting at the bottom and finishing at the top with an even distribution. What I want to do is restrict the placement of these protrusions somewhere along the trunk. And to do that, you're gonna change the protrusion start and protrusions end values. So if you increase the start, they're not gonna be starting at the base, but higher up the trunk. And if you decrease the end, they're gonna be finishing up before they reach the tip of the trunk. So again, this gives a lot of control. Now in the case of a pine tree, they don't really go down a lot, so you would really reduce the randomization and you decrease the Y. Rotation like this. Yeah, something like that. Now of course you can play with the different rotations. So here for example, rotating around the y-axis, will make them rotate like this, which doesn't make a lot of sense, but rotating along the z-axis will make them rotate like this, and the same applies for the randomization. Now the scale Y will scale the protrusions along their y-axis without changing their radius. Alright, so this is something you can use in case you wanted to do that. And you can randomize their size to make some of them bigger than the others, and this will give a lot of realism to the trunk. Especially if I increase the size here, like this, reduce the density a notch, not so much, 0.025, and played with the randomization of the size, this will give you a nice distribution of these protrusions along the trunk. We have seen the scale to profile and what it does.